they're not that good. I mean, we've all seen it. Like the modes just underperform constantly. Players abandon them quickly after they come out, and they go back to playing the freaking missions again. That's what happens. You play the freaking dumb new mode for like a week or a month, and then you go right back to doing the regular missions again because the modes were so terrible and boring that you go back to the missions that were just as terrible and boring. Oh god, this game. Oh, what's going on, everyone? Mutant Cowboy here. I know it's been a little while since my last video. Just had some personal things going on, and obviously I wasn't making some videos. So there's plenty of stuff for me to actually cover. Over the next couple days, I'll probably be making some videos on the new announced Division content, or at least their Year 5 roadmap and all that stuff that they got going on. And of course, we've got that new mode Descent, which is kind of going to be the focus of this video. It's basically just going to be about the Division's mode problem. Now, of course, there's many different aspects that I could kind of approach with this, and I think the best way to start off would just be the fact that, acknowledging that the Division does have a mode problem. Now, if you look at most games, right, no game really excels in modes. And by this, what I mean is that most modes have less population than the base game. It's just the way that it works for pretty much every genre. Now, there are a few notable exceptions, including something like Fortnite. Now, many of you may not remember, but Fortnite was originally like a building tower defense zombie game. And that was actually I was actually kind of interested in it when that was announced. It looked kind of fun. Unfortunately, that mode was kind of terrible, and it was quickly overshadowed by the Battle Royale mode that we all know Fortnite to be now. Now, I don't care for that mode, and I don't like it, but that was what became the most popular. Other games have tried modes, and some of them have been pretty successful, like Call of Duty's zombie modes. Those have been pretty successful, and that's one of the biggest reasons why they've basically put them into every freaking Call of Duty game since it was originally released. I think it's like World at War. However, I think World at War's zombie mode is probably just the best one. But in this is kind of the problem with modes in the Division in general, right? Because the modes are never going to be as successful as the base game. It means that, you have to be very careful with how you design a mode, because, if you make a mode that's drastically different from what the game is, basically a different genre in itself, then it's probably not going to see a huge amount of success, because that's not why people are playing that game. The mode itself could be great, but people aren't going to want to jump into it because that's not what the game is, right? So, you may see the Division and you may love, something like survival, right? You may love a survival game, but because it's tied into the Division, you might never really even think about it. And so survival kind of suffered because that's not the intention behind the Division. Now, I mean, as a whole, I guess, if you look at all the Division modes, or at least, I guess, the PvE focused ones, you've had Underground, then you had Survival. Of course, that also had a PvP focus to it as well. But then you had Resistance, and with Division 2, you got Kinley College, Summit, Countdown, and of course, they're going to be coming out with that new Descent mode. Now, when you just look at these modes, a lot of them are interesting in certain aspects, but then a lot of them kind of fall short in other areas. Underground allowed you to keep your build, so you could actually build outside of Underground for Underground. So you could farm different pieces of gear to kind of improve your survival rate in Underground, or kind of just improve your playthroughs of Underground. And that kind of played into the nature of the Division as a whole, making builds and using them for whatever desired purpose. Now, of course, where the Underground kind of failed was it was pretty dang generic. I mean, they had like 8 rooms that, kind of rotated between like 8 different hallways, and, the enemies were pretty much always the same. I mean, it wasn't really like a very interesting mode. It was just kind of like a mission that was randomly generated, but of course, with the problems of random generation is it leaves a lot to be desired. It kind of feels a little bit lifeless, and they're not as fun. And of course, the rewards for that mode were also not very good. I mean, it was just kind of a very poor way to farm gear, and because of that, it wasn't very interesting or appealing to many players. I mean, maybe they tried it a couple times, but after that, I was like, well, why am I playing this? It's not very good. And then, of course, once they rebooted the whole game and they changed the difficulties around, it was pretty much just a very easy mode that you could run through solo without too much difficulty. And kind of, it reduced the need to run in a group and have your friends play with you, and that kind of also killed the mode because, when you have friends playing with you, again, you are more likely to continue playing it. So by the time that, they changed everything around, the mode was basically just dead anyway. Then, of course, survival, which I'm not going to lie, I didn't like survival. I mean, it wasn't really something that I enjoyed because to me, that's not what the Division is, right? Now, I know a lot of people loved it because, it just offered something unique. Personally, I mean, the one thing I've kind of did like about survival was that it reused the map in kind of like a new and fresh way, which is something that I always wanted them to do because the world was so big and so interesting that they could have done a lot more with it. So at least, having that with survival was some way to, reuse some of these assets, get, PvE players who never experienced anything in the Dark Zone to at least, see the layout and all that kind of stuff. However, my main gripe with survival is just, the fact that it was disconnected from the game entirely. I mean, the story was kind of weak as to what was going on. You lose all the access to your gear. You basically just, it's a one and done kind of thing. You spend like an hour or so running through this mode, building a character, only to lose all that progress, and go back to your main character just for a few bags of terrible loot at the very end if you manage to extract it all. So in that aspect, it was kind of boring for me because obviously I wanted to go in and get loot that I really liked, but the amount of loot that you got from survival was terrible. And just the fact that it was also time based. A lot of players don't want to incorporate any sort of like strategy based combat or tactical based combat on a set period of time. So the aspects that people like, maybe like using skills or using cover, were kind of dumped in favor of just pure DPS, running through as fast as you can, killing the enemies as fast as you can, picking up the loot as fast as you can, and getting out. And of course, that favors mostly DPS players. So if you weren't DPS, or if you didn't really enjoy always playing DPS, then survival was kind of, a less enjoyable, prospect for you. And of course, that didn't help when they, changed a bunch of the things with skills and kind of nerfed a bunch of skills, because all of the skills from that, 1 to 30 side, from the base game before, they ended up, getting to like world tier 5 and all that stuff, with like 280 gear score or whatever the max was, I forget. But all those changes compounded to make skills, not only just less usable, but just terrible. So you're pretty much forced to be a DPS build to get through survival efficiently, if at all. And then, of course, they came out with Resistance, which was something I had high hopes for when they announced it. I mean, the idea of that whole unlocking certain systems and, basically spending the in-mode currency to get better stuff or unlock rooms and stuff like that sounded great to me. In reality, that's not exactly what we got. It was just kind of, you open up rooms and then you can turn on like some turrets or a pulse scanner or like a healing box or something. I forget exactly all the intricacies of the mode, but it was fairly basic, right? It was nothing like I'd hoped, coming from like a Call of Duty Zombies type, thing. I was hoping there would be like special weapons on the walls that you could, purchase, or, special skills or special abilities, special talents, stuff like that. And that didn't exist in the mode. And because of that, it was also just a very kind of boring mode. I mean, the objectives, they felt boring. It was, kind of like designed to punish most builds except like DPS builds or, DPS builds with a healer. They weren't very beneficial to, squishy skill builds because you just couldn't get past some of the modifiers that they had in there. And trying to run to these objectives as a squishy skill build also wasn't very beneficial. And, the waves that they had, it didn't really feel very rewarding. It was kind of, just like you're fighting a random group of enemies that come at you with a boss, and then you just repeat it over and over again. It didn't offer or feel really that different in terms of like the combat loop of the game. And, like I already said, the unlocks themselves that were offered in the game, they were they were boring. They really didn't offer anything new. They didn't really offer anything impressive to the game, and they fell short of just providing any player with an actual reason to continue playing Resistance, because there just wasn't anything good there. I mean, like I said, I had high hopes for it when they announced it. It sounded really cool, like a Call of Duty zombie type mode, and that's just not what we got. I mean, honestly, if you look at some of at least my favorite modes, I mean, we're talking about like the Gears of War Horde mode, the Gears of War Beast mode, which was the mode where you could actually choose the locusts and actually go at the AI controlled humans, and that was kind of fun because it offered a different playstyle that you normally don't get. Right? You get basically like a new set of abilities, a new set of attacks. You kind of have like all these different classes that you can play to progress through it, and it was fun, starting out as like a ticker and just blowing up people, to getting one of the maulers and swinging stuff and blasting things with a boomer. I mean, that was fun. Of course, another mode that was kind of like that was the Left 4 Dead versus mode, where you could actually play as the special infected and attack the players who were trying to go through it. So basically be like players with the human players, right? And then players with the special infected. So it was like two groups. It's kind of like a PvP PvE thing going on, and I thought that was really fun. And then, of course, like I've already mentioned, Call of Duty Zombies, where you're racking up these points to get rewards so you can buy these different unique weapons off the wall. Obviously, they start off fairly basic, but then of course you want to get that alien blaster, and get some of these power ups and everything like that. And that was fun. I loved that. That was really cool. I spent way too many hours playing that mode. It was obviously just a basic throw together kind of mode, but it was good. It was fun. It fit within Call of Duty really well. And of course, I guess the main thing that you're probably going to notice between this and the Division is obviously Division's a looter. So the Division, for a mode to be successful, comes with its own unique challenges. Obviously, you need to basically cater to your base audience, but offer something new and unique that still caters to that base audience. Now, Division 2 really didn't improve on the model at all. Obviously, the first mode, I guess you could say, we got was like Kinley College. And I really don't need to spend much time telling you how bad Kinley College was. I mean, it was kind of interesting the first time you went through it. But I mean, I'll be honest, after the first time I ran through it, not even the first time, the first section that I ran through, I was like, oh my god, I don't want to run through this. And if it wasn't for the fact that there was the exotic there, I wouldn't have probably even continued, because it was not very good. It was not very fun. I mean, it was a little bit different from your normal mission, but not enough. There wasn't, they kind of had this like, they wanted to portray it as being like a bit puzzle based. You had to go through and find these things and figure stuff out, but really there wasn't much puzzle mechanic or much to figure out. It was basically just you're running back and forth until you hit the right thing. That's basically the gist of Kinley College. It just wasn't good. And of course they came out with Summit, which I'm not going to say Summit was terrible, but it was pretty much just underground, but still without windows. They still managed to get rid of the windows because they didn't want to put any background, view or visuals in there. So they just wanted to have that. If any of you have actually seen it, it's basically just a floating level out in the middle of nowhere. Like that's what it looks like from people who have like gone past the borders and stuff like that. When they've actually found the buildings, that you can literally just see the layout. You can literally just see the layout of Summit, floating in the sky. It's pretty ridiculous. So that's why they never added any sort of like visual stimuli to the outside of the world, because there's nothing to see. And that kind of just describes Summit in general. It's very boring, very dull. It's very repetitive. I mean, dumb, bland, any sort of synonyms you want to think about. I mean, it's just, it was not a well-designed level, right? It was just, the random nature of it wasn't very good. The building blocks were rather boring. Just the nature of the enemies themselves, it was all boring. It didn't really provide anything useful. And of course, by default, what did they have to do at the very end? Well, they had to add hunters. That's pretty much, when they can't really come up with something good, what do? They add hunters. And at this point in, the franchise, how many times have we seen hunters, right? Hunters were originally the end of survival. That was the big challenge at survival. And since then, it's basically just been, well, we don't really have anything to go with, so let's just paste hunters in there because they don't want to actually do any sort of new, interesting, or really challenging mechanics for, I guess, a solo player or maybe a group. They just go with hunters by default, and that's really boring because hunters themselves should be this big kind of threat. They should be something that's not just like a gimmick. And I feel that that's the way that they've kind of been treated, especially with Division 2, as just a gimmick for something. Like we don't really have any sort of enemies to throw in here, so let's just put in a hunter, and that kind of sucks for me. But the one thing I did like about Summit was the fact that they added the targeted loot. Now, of course, I really wouldn't consider Summit a very good loot grinding area, but targeted loot was a nice feature to get people into that mode. Of course, once they added Countdown, which also had targeted loot, Summit was kind of useless for anybody who wasn't doing just XP farms, right? So Countdown, I found it to be actually a pretty fun mode. And I mean, the amount of loot that you got from Countdown is still one of the best ways, in my opinion, to farm stuff. And I think that the reward currency that you use outside of the mode to buy, extra loot is also pretty good. It's kind of a way to tie it in. Like, okay, you did this mode, and not only are you getting the loot and pulling it out with the build that you have that you went into Countdown with, you're, able to pull out even more loot, more targeted, specific to what you actually hope to find. And that's great. So that is one of the biggest reasons why I think Countdown is pretty successful. I mean, I generally think that Countdown has much better matchmaking than pretty much any mode in the game. I mean, it's pretty easy to get 8 players together by matchmaking. And hopefully I think they fixed the issues by now so that the matchmaking doesn't break down. But it's fantastic, and it's no wonder why people are going in there. Again, loot, and it's fairly fun. Now, of course, it does have its own issues. I mean, yeah, it's fairly repetitive. There's only like 4 terminals to actually complete things in, and the objectives are always pretty boring. It again, like a lot of the more, I guess, team-oriented things in the Division, it strongly promotes DPS, fast-paced run and gun builds over, healer builds or skill builds, because that's just the nature of it. Again, it's on a timer, so you have to get it done quickly, and, skill builds and healer builds don't really support that very well. I mean, yeah, healers are great, but if people are running around and not being in your heals, then it's kind of just pointless to use that. So that kind of sucks. Again, time-based, a lot of players who are in the Division are not here for time-based, speed runs and stuff like that. They just want to play and enjoy. And yeah, of course, there are plenty of people who do want to get the best time or do want to farm it optimally and want to get through as quickly as possible. But there's other people who are just playing to play, right? And when you have a time-based mechanic, that does end up turning a lot of players off. Now, of course, where does that leave us now? Well, obviously, we've got Descent coming out. And from my little bit of time playing Descent, because obviously I didn't have too much time before I had to leave, and I kind of ran out of time to play it. Just PTS was pretty dang short, and I didn't get much time in it. So I only had a short amount of time in it, but I really saw pretty much everything I needed to see. I didn't really, see a huge amount of reasons why Descent is going to be a great game mode. I think when I started it, I had, a certain amount of talents that popped up, and pretty much through the playthroughs that I saw, it was always these same, like few handful of talents that just kept popping up. There wasn't very much diversity. And again, a lot of it seemed to favor DPS-based gameplay. A lot of these skill-based talents or whatnot that I saw were terrible. I couldn't get any skills besides, like, I think once I managed to get the Restorer Hive, but every other time it was like the Incinerator Turret or the Seeker, what is it, the Airburst Seeker, and I saw like the Decoy, and I think I saw Sticky Foam, and maybe like that was basically like it. I think I saw like maybe 6 different skills all of the time that I played. And I looked repeatedly because I'm like, I need a new skill because I don't have any. And in fact, by the end, basically, I can't even say that I ever bought like two skills besides the one time that I got the Restore Hive and the foam, whatever, the chem launcher foam. That was basically like the only time that I ever had two skills equipped, because everything else was just like, why am I, this is stupid. So yeah, so that sucked. And then of course, even if I could get other skills, there were no real talents to go with it that really felt good. And I think I saw one that directly boosted skill damage, and everything else is like handling or armor regen or weapon damage. And so again, this is a very DPS focused mode, which not everyone who plays the Division wants to focus on DPS only. And again, the one time I got that healing skill, the healing skill's healing was terrible. So like, I can't even imagine, like if you're in a group trying to be the healer, I mean, you got this skill that just doesn't do dog shit, so like, I don't know. Again, it's also dull. It's repetitive. It is basically just, again, disconnected from the entire game. And the rewards really aren't there. I mean, like, at least, from what I saw, who knows, maybe when the game goes live, there'll be a much more robust reward system. But it seems to be that the majority of the rewards are actually focused on the currency, which is then focused on giving you better buffs in the game or in the Descent mode itself. So one of the things I noticed is you don't actually start off with any headshot damage. So like, I was trying to get headshots with a sniper rifle, and they were doing the exact same amount of damage as a body shot. And so I don't think I had any crit damage, any crit chance, any headshot damage, stuff like that. And so all of that stuff is apparently, you only get it from your talents, and you only get it from these upgrades that you get once you complete the mode and then use your currency to buy these upgrades, and you can get up to like 120% headshot damage or something like that, which is great. I mean, I like the ability to actually improve the character in some way, but the fact that it's all tied just to the mode itself means that you're not really building your character, you're just building your character for the one mode. And it kind of seems, it seems like a little bit of fake grind, and I don't like that feeling. So I'm looking at Descent like this complete disconnected zone that has no real bearing on my actual character, and it's more of just kind of like a throwaway thing to do. And this, leads me to believe that it's basically just going to be like a lot of the other modes. It's not going to really find too much success, because people are going to do it once or twice and be like, wow, this is the same stuff over and over and over again. Like, I don't like, like a lot of these talents that I'm unlocking are useless. A lot of these weapons are still terrible. And you're going to end up resorting to playing the same way over and over and over again, because that's the options that you get that are usable. And of course, the mode itself can take a really long time to, like if you're actually trying to go up, the really high amount of levels in there, or I guess really low amount of levels. I don't know how that works because it's considered Descent. But anyway, one run, just to get to Nemesis could be about an hour. I mean, yeah, you can speed run it quicker, but just to get to Nemesis, you're probably looking at about an hour for an average player, if not even more. And if you want to continue on further, then obviously you're looking at even more time. And as far as I can tell, there's no real super good reward for getting, through it really far, besides, again, this in-game currency that you use to upgrade your character in Descent mode only. Now, of course, there are a few things about it I like. Some of the talent combinations are fun. Most notably, I actually did enjoy having the Lady Death talent on all of my weapons. Having that 75% amplified damage on a marksman rifle. I mean, that's pretty good. I was basically just one-shotting everything. That came with the downside of the Nemesis one-shotting me. Yeah, I didn't have full armor investment. I think I had 2 or 3 rolls into my armor. But yeah, full armor, full health, one-tapped me, and I was done. So that was pretty ridiculous. But I did enjoy it fighting through just the regular enemies. Lady Death's talent on pretty much everything. The other one I enjoyed was the Bullet King talent on everything. So just unlimited ammo on my pistol, on my LMG, on my AR, my SMG, my rifle, whatever. Just the fact that it just constantly keeps reloading, and I don't have to worry about it. Just keep firing enemies coming through the door. I mean, just really good for just blowing through all the enemies. I mean, you just camp outside the door with an LMG and you just take out the entire wave. Which, again, I guess that kind of makes it ridiculously easy. And I don't know if they're going to be changing anything specifically as far as difficulty goes. But, I can say it did mostly feel ridiculously easy. It wasn't a very difficult mode. Again, outside of the fact that I went to Nemesis and as soon as he hit me, I was done. Like, it's just, there was no hope. I was just like, wow, okay, that's it for me. But, yeah, so I just kind of look at the mode and I'm like, this is not exactly what I think sells the Division, right? I mean, when you look at a lot of these things, like I've already said, the focus pretty much becomes on hunters or hunter-like enemies for all of the real bosses or the real strong fights in the game. That's pretty much it. That's their go-to. That's all they can do. There's no, let's say that somebody brought in a freaking tank and the tank can move back and forth or do whatever. There's nothing like that. There's no like missions where there are snipers on all the roofs and you kind of need to like take them out before you can advance, or whatever. You're under fire while you're trying to like get through a point. Kind of like that one part in the Ironworks raid where you actually have those snipers who are just going to one tap you unless you like suppress them while your team runs through. Outside of an event like that, there really isn't anything of kind of like a sniper suppression type stuff where you have to sneak through or get through or whatnot. Again, there's no tanks, there's no APCs that are moving, there's no vehicles. You have no real encounters besides the same problem that Division 1 had, kind of like outside of Division 1's Colonel Bliss fight where he actually was in the helicopter. All of the bosses in the game are either just some random named person who's just incredibly tanky for no reason and has no real special abilities, besides maybe now they get to use different versions of shade skills. But they're just people, right? There's no very bespoke mechanical based fights. And I mean, yeah, you get the fire truck on blocks, you get the APC that can't move, you get the crashed Osprey, and this is just kind of the nature of it. I mean, look at the first raid, the big Razorback, that was just a big immobile block that spit out some drones. Like this is the peak of their boss fights, just things that don't move. And all of these modes, they don't feature even any of that, right? So they just literally have to go with hunters, which is just again, I mean, fighting hunters once or twice, is kind of like a very interesting thing. It's like, oh man, I'm going to fight the hunters, but then they overuse them, and it becomes just another gimmick in the game, and it's not as exciting, it's not as fun to fight hunters when that's all you fight for every challenge. Again, what we're going to see that players don't really like in a vast majority of these situations is disconnection from the actual game and from their actual character. You spend a lot of time making these builds and upgrading these things, and you want to use them, and you want to use it in something that's going to test your build. But what we see here is, obviously they're just disconnecting it from everything, and all of the work that you've done previously, all of the grinding and everything, is just completely irrelevant. So it doesn't have any meaning, and that just, that kills the mood for a mode. That kind of just kills the desire to keep going through it, because everything you've done before is useless and pointless. Again, we're going to see that time-based modes are, again, something that players do not really like. Now, I wouldn't say Descent is time-based, but obviously it's just kind of like infinite, right? So like when you have a mode that just doesn't end, or doesn't necessarily have like an ending, you're kind of looking at like people are going to see it as like, man, like how far am I going to go? Like, do I want to quit? I got this far. Do I want to quit now? Well, I got to get off. What am I going to do? My progress isn't going to be saved. I can't, just come in at this point if I get off. And I think that's going to annoy players, because, they're going to feel like, well, I only have 2 hours to play. Even if I could play all those, even if I did survive all those 2 hours, I'm going to have to get off and just kill myself anyway. I'm going to have to, lose all my progress to do it. And again, that turns people off. And of course, we've also got the fact that just the mode itself doesn't really bring too much. I mean, yeah, you get some different ways to use the talents. and they do bring back a few of the Gear 1.0 talents, which is kind of a nice touch. I mean, they're still in the game. I don't know why they're not in the live game, but they brought them back, and so it's kind of a fun way to play through with some of those talents again. But overall, besides for that, there's nothing really new here. They didn't really add too much. It's just another just run through and do stuff, and that's it. There's no big bad excitement. There's no like real victory there to be had. I mean, again, besides defeating the one hunter, and there's probably just going to be ways to gimmick that and cheese that make that irrelevant. And then since you don't, I guess, encounter the nemesis afterwards, you can then just you cheese it up to the nemesis, and then once you get through the nemesis, then you actually start making your real build or whatever if you're really interested in just kind of like grinding out the levels. But who's going to really be interested in doing that? And I think this is the kind of what I alluded to earlier, where if the game mode doesn't necessarily incorporate what the game is into itself, then the vast majority of your player base aren't going to give a crap about the actual mode that you're adding. And this is what has been one of the biggest problems for every mode that they've had, right? Underground did a fairly good job. You could keep your own build, but it was just boring and bland. Like the entire area was just all the same, and you just kind of kept going through it over and over and over again. And it was basically just like a single mission. And how many times do you want to do, that one mission for no specific reward, right? Now, people did the LeRae Barrett mission because they wanted the showstopper or LeRae Barrett's chess piece, whatever. They wanted that. So they ran through it over and over and over again. But if that reward wasn't there, they wouldn't necessarily focus on that mission as much as they did. And that's why Underground failed, because it was basically just the same mission in the disguise of a randomly generated mission. Survival, again, that kind of saw limited success. Now, a lot of the Division 1 diehards talk, survival up like it's the best thing since sliced bread. Again, I wasn't interested in survival, didn't really carry my character through it. It was random generation every time of what loot's gonna drop and if you get lucky or not, and half the time you could just get dog shit, and it was just an uncomfortable playthrough, and you felt like you wasted an hour because all you ever got was just greens, or maybe you got like the blue pistols, and that was it. It didn't feel great every time you ran through it. Sometimes it did, other times it felt pretty terrible. And again, if you were a skill build or kind of like a tank build, it wasn't the mode for you, because the time. Again, resistance, yeah, that just kind of felt like a waste of time again. Yeah, there were ways to kind of like cheese the rewards where you just basically just play to like level 10 and then quit, and then you'd go play through level 10 and quit. But besides for that, like, it really wasn't a very good mode. I mean, I can't even think of how many times I actually played it. When it came out, maybe like 2 or 3 dozen times I played the mode, and after that it was done, right? We want to talk about Kinley College. That's just everyone knows that. Summit, again, dull and boring. Countdown, probably one of the better ones, but still, if it wasn't for the loot, nobody would be playing that. I mean, the only reason people play that is because there are massive amounts of loot to get. And, we're looking at Descent, which doesn't seem like it's going to be a massive loot farm, and it's going to be fairly repetitive, just like Underground. It's going to be uninteresting. So, you look at the Division, and the Division is at least popular among the people who like it because of, the build diversity, the looting, the progression. And people have spent hours upon days, weeks, months. There's people who are at over 10,000 hours in the game, right? I mean, I think I'm at like 2,000, but I mean, there are people with thousands upon thousands of hours in the game. Why? Because they wanted to get the best loot. They wanted to, build their character perfectly. They wanted to max out everything. They wanted to get that perfect build, because they could take that build and do anything, right? You could go into PvP, you could go back into PvE, all of the future content, it's going to carry over, unless they, raise the level cap again. But that's a different discussion. What the problem is Descent mode is going to be another one and done thing where you do this stuff for really no reason, just to basically just further your Descent score. And unless you really care about getting like on the leaderboards for the most level cleared in Descent, you're just not going to be that interested in it. And it's going to basically fall flat. I mean, that's really how I see it. And that's kind of sad. I mean, you got to look at what, again, people play the Division for. I mean, I want to get the gear to make my build so I can go through all sorts of content. Descent doesn't allow that. It's not going to be carrying over all this headshot damage bonus or, crit chance bonus or crit damage bonus or, accuracy handling, whatever the other little bonuses are that you can get through their little in-game hub there. It's not going to carry that over, so you're going to play through it, and then you're probably going to be done after a few times. I mean, I played it, maybe like 2 or 3 hours when I had the chance. And afterwards, I was kind of like, okay, like that's great. I didn't really have a huge driving force to continue playing it on the PTS. It was not that exciting. And it maybe when it comes out, like officially, and maybe when it's fully released, maybe there's some different things going on. Maybe there's more talents. Maybe there's more carryover or crossover or, something interesting. But as of right now, as it stands, the mode isn't very impressive for me. And, overall, this is just kind of the nature of Division modes. Like I said, they don't have a cohesive nature with the actual game that makes them compelling for the majority of players. They're always kind of bespoke in the fact that they're picking a specific subset of the player base that might enjoy it, right? Like when you think of like divisions in the Division, right? You've got PvP and PvE. Like those that's the main division, right? You've got maybe at the most you got like 20% of players who like PvP in the Division. Probably less. I think it's generally probably around like 10% of players in the Division who like the PvP in the Division. And that means, 90% of everyone else is basically strictly PvE. But of course, then when you divide PvE, you've got people who love playing in group, and you've got people who love playing solo. You got people who are all about their raids, and that's kind of a different subset. But now, when you're talking about these modes, right, you're again cutting out a small portion of the player base who are actually going to enjoy this, right? So people who do raids are probably not really going to be that interested in Descent. People who do, PvP are probably not going to be interested in Descent. People who play solo, yeah, they might like Descent for a little while, but then, again, most of the players that play Division are there for the building and the diversity and the kind of the constant improvements to your main character, which Descent doesn't do. So you're building up your character for a specific mode that's going to be relegated to a very small population of the actual community, and I think that's going to be just a detriment to the game. And this is one of the biggest problems where, like, it seems that the developers at Massive and I guess Ubi Bucharest are focusing on things that really don't benefit the game as a whole. I mean, there are plenty of better ways they could have spent their time making a mode that wouldn't have been like this. I mean, they could have reused Summit and kind of like added like a different Summit mode, right? And just reuse those assets because they're basically the same. It's not really anything different, right? They didn't need to go through and make this entire elaborate system for something that could have easily been just added to as an improvement to Summit. Or they could have just added new things to Countdown, right? Instead of just focusing a bunch of effort on something that's not that great, that's going to, again, whittle down what's the community is actually playing. I mean, now if anyone goes to Descent from Countdown, now of course the population of Countdown is lower, so then people are going to have trouble with matchmaking, and that's just going to cause other issues itself, and it's going to water down the player base in an unfriendly way to the average player. So I just have a terrible time looking at it like, what are their priorities? The priorities of the dev team seem to be astoundingly bad to me. They focus on things that I just think aren't what the Division's about. I mean, if they wanted to make, these kind of modes, make a free-to-play offshoot game, like they did with Heartland, right? I mean, as far as I know, the people that I play with, the people that I talk to about the game, they don't have any interest in Heartland because that's not the Division. That's Fortnite with some weird crap in it, right? It's not good for skill builds because they've got their own little classes and they've basically just gutted the skill system. So it's basically just catering to the DPS crowd, and it's catering to the DPS crowd who likes battle royales. And the thing is, if you've talked to most PvPers in the division, most of them don't like Fortnite. Like I don't get the feeling that PvPers in the division like Fortnite. I don't get the feeling that PvPers in the division like battle royales in general. I'm not saying that all of them, dislike battle royales, but you're generally a specific kind of player if you're in the division, and you're generally a specific kind of player if you're engaging in the dark zone or PvP in general. And that doesn't mesh up with a lot of these other games. So if you wanted to play a battle royale, you're probably already playing, like Call of Duty, whatever that battle royale is, Warzone or something. So yeah, I think that, there's a target audience for certain things, and then they're just kind of wasting their time for other stuff. I think the vast majority of people who are interested in the division would much rather have a huge new world to explore, right? Maybe instead of wasting their time with this dumb mode, they could have expanded the New York map, right? Maybe ported in the entire area of New York that was in Division 1. I mean, look, if you want to bring some players back, put Manhattan back in the freaking game, right? Put that whole area of Division 1 into Division 2. Obviously, that would be a huge challenge. I'm not gonna lie, but they could start small, right? It could be part of a roadmap where, okay, we're going to, start taking back New York, right? So, maybe, during season 1, it's, like the southernmost area. And then maybe, it's like kind of like you're getting to the dark zone in season 2. And then maybe, you're going midway through the dark zone in season 3. And, something progressing along these lines where they're working on the content as they're releasing it, right? Building this stuff up and constantly providing new and interesting stuff to do in the game. But instead, they keep cherry picking these weird, dumb modes that just, the vast majority of the player base doesn't really care about. Besides for, again, Countdown, which is probably, arguably the most successful of the modes, at least in my opinion, outside of, like Conflict or Last Stand. I think those were actually pretty popular back in Division 1. And I think Conflict's still pretty popular in Division 2. But, as of right now, I would say Countdown's probably just where everyone's at. Like no one's in like college. Very few people are playing Summit. I can't matchmake for that. And I don't think, Descent mode is going to be a huge matchmaking, just catch-all for players. I just don't think that people are going to be driving to Descent in droves. So, again, I'm looking at it like, why are they spending so much time on things that don't really appeal to the widest audience of the, of the player base? And I'm not saying like everything should be just focused on one specific group, but what I'm saying is, if the vast majority of your player base is PvE, then find some PvE content that appeals to the PvE players, right? And then the other biggest, I guess, subset of your players is PvP. So find a way to add extra dark zones, or add a bigger dark zone, or fix the dark zones, or something, right? Add a hardcore skirmish mode instead of the whatever the regular base, like if you actually looked at the skirmish matchmaking and when they, show you all the modifiers that are active, obviously there was some sort of intent behind those modifiers, as in, maybe there was going to be different modes for skirmish that were slightly different, like all of the specialization weapons were turned off, or, all of the freaking skills were turned off, or, weapon damage was reduced, so the skills were just, whatever. All I'm saying is there are modifiers there clearly displayed. And if, PvP is kind of lacking, why aren't you making modes that enhance the PvP, bringing some PvP players back? Why aren't you expanding the actual player versus environment areas? Why aren't you making New York bigger? Why aren't you expanding the northern side of Washington, D.C., or maybe the southern side of Washington, D.C., or maybe just going across the bridge into like Dulles, I think that's where it's at. I mean, you've got plenty of areas there, but not Dulles, that's the airport. Arlington, I think it's Arlington. Anyway, so if you've got, some sort of expansion going on to these different areas, then that's going to draw the PvE crowd back, right? You add different mechanics, better bosses, things that are exciting to do. I mean, hopefully, they said that they got like the incursions coming out. I don't know what that's going to mean or how that's going to actually look. I mean, when the game launched, like I looked at the strongholds and I'm like, I think it was the first stronghold, which was the District Union Arena. You get in that first fight with I think it's the first fight. I think it's the first boss fight. I don't remember. But it's the one where there's like the armored car in the room and you blow up the armored car. And I'm like, oh my God, this is an incursion. This is just a long mission based incursion. I know it's kind of like, God, I hate that because, again, Falcon's Lost, Dragon's Nest, Stolen Signal. Was that Stolen Signal? Whichever one. You had the three immobile vehicles, and I just went into the stronghold, and I'm like, oh God, it's an immobile vehicle. And yeah, that was awful. And if that's what they're going to bring back for incursions, I don't want to see it because that's stupid. And at the same time, I don't want to see incursions if they're just going to be like, oh, here's this random Joe Schmo that has 1,000,000 health, and you're just going to constantly be swarmed by waves of enemies. I don't want to see that either because that's not fun either. They need, if they're going to make incursions and they're going to make them good, then they need to actually have some sort of real boss mechanics. Something like a tank that actually destroys cover and so you can't stay in the same cover over and over again. Or again, an APC that is moving up and down the streets or whatever that can actually run you over and just instantly, down you. Or maybe they've got helicopters coming in and, doing strafing runs on this area while you're trying to, advance through. I don't know. Something interesting that isn't in the game needs to be there, right? They can't just continue reusing the exact same fight styles that they are. It doesn't work for the game anymore. It's beyond old at this point. And there's a bunch of other issues that they really need to address. Notably on my list, before I end this video, the things they need to fix is just the whole shade thing and the whole expertise system. I mean, they're terrible. I mean, look, the fact that people are getting like 2 million health, the fact that people, just literally cheesed their characters, deleted characters and created new ones, and use the, various shade exploits to get incredible shade levels and then basically just delete these characters to just get all these materials and then boost up their levels to like level 22 on every piece of gear that they own without really any effort, while normal players aren't doing that. I think it's crap, right? It's ruined PvP. PvP's I can't even touch it. I can't touch PvP. I haven't been able to touch it for a while. The PvE is boring and dry. It's the same stuff over and over again. The only time I actually have fun is if I go into Countdown and I'm just like helping out random players who generally aren't that great at Countdown, able to just help them get through it a little bit better. That's really it. That's all there is for me to do. And this is kind of why I basically just haven't been playing the Division. So I hope that some of this year 5 stuff that they're promising really is good, really is interesting. I hope it really helps fix some of the problems in the game. I hope that some of these changes that they're making actually makes it interesting again, gets past some of this just boring same old mechanic stuff, and goes back to the Division's roots of being this interesting kind of like third-person shooter dungeon crawler with all these different things to do that are fun and unique. Putting a shooter in Diablo or putting a shooter in World of Warcraft, like putting this kind of feather in the hat of like, we are a shooter, but we're so much more than that. And, over the last couple of years, it's really just been, we're a shooter and there's some tanky yellow bar enemies. Yep, that's what we offer. So I really hope year 5 is going to be good. I'm really hoping the best for it, but, we'll just have to wait and see. But yeah, as far as these modes go, they really just need to stop putting as much effort into them as they are, because they're not that good. I mean, we've all seen it, the modes just underperform constantly. Players abandon them quickly after they come out, and they go back to playing the freaking missions again. You know, that's what happens. You play the freaking dumb new mode for like a week or a month, and then you go right back to doing the regular missions again because the modes were so terrible and boring that you go back to the missions that were just as terrible and boring. Oh god, this game. Oh, that'll do it for me, guys. You know, only so much Division I can talk about in one video. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one.